Okay, we're here. It is Grandpa, Dad's birthday, March 4th, 2019. And that makes you 90 years old today. What do you think of that?
Did you say 98?
90.
90.
90.
Yeah, and that's it. Project your voice.
So tell us about yourself. First, your full name and who your parents are. Oh, in fact, I'm kind of curious about Grandma and Grandpa. What was their names?
Do you want to start out when I was born?
No? I want to know what your dad's name, mom's name was.
Well, do you want me to give you my name?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm Merlin Larson Jr. And my father was Merlin J. Larson. My mother was Roa Mary Patterson. And I was born in Glendale, Idaho, about 5 miles out northeast of Preston. And I was born in the home that my grandfather built.
And what was his name?
farmed. And his name was Lars Christian Larson. And my grandmother's name was Elizabeth. That's all I remember much on that, because my grandfather remarried after his first wife died, and he married a grandma that I grew up with called Aunt May. And she was a Hebden. So that brings us into the Hebden line.
Okay.
My grandfather homesteaded this farm in Glendale and built the home and the barn and everything. Those, of course, was years before I was born. But he did build some nice places. He built a real nice home, and it had an upstairs, had almost 2 houses in it. Had as I remember, a hallway going upstairs, and on the one side there was a place with a kitchen and bedrooms, bathroom, believe it or not, in those days. And on the other side was the same thing, and some of the bedrooms were upstairs. I was fortunate enough in those days that my grandfather, looking ahead, had built what they call a Delco plant. And that Delco plant ran by, I think, kerosene, I'm not sure. Anyway, it produced electricity. So when I was born, we had electric lights. And that was a long, long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. When was it?
Pardon?
When was it?
Well, when I was born, 1929, why,
Okay.
that was a long time ago. He had a large barn that built because all the farming had to be done by horses. And one part of it had a big stable for the horses. And then in the middle was the hay and things to feed them. And they had some cattle on the other side, some milk cows, but not many milk cows. Down by the house, grandfather built a couple of chicken coops, had some chickens there. And then between the barn and the house, which was maybe a couple of 100 yards, he had what was called a bullpen. And it was made out of heavy timber, just like the ties for the railroad. And they had their own bull, and he was a mean one. Anyway, that was kind of the layout that was there, and because everything was done by horsepower at that time. I don't know how far back you want to go, but as I was born in that area, in the house, That day I do not remember. Anyway, my first 4 years was in that place. And I might mention that when my grandfather built all that, he built a huge apple orchard. I'll bet there was 30 trees in that apple orchard of all different kinds of apples. And so they built a place up that we could be self-sufficient in. And of course, all the transportation was done by buggy and things at those days. I don't remember much about it. But I lived my first 4 years in that place in Glendale. And so prior to that time, to the time I was born, I don't remember what organization was put together to do it, but they built a dam about 500 yards away from our house, and it backed up water. It was called the Glendale Reservoir, and it was about 2.5 miles long and maybe the widest at half a mile. It's a pretty good sized piece of water, and the main ditch that they built ran in back of the house and on down the valley to take care of the properties.
Was it just a private reservoir, or was it one that?
It was a membership reservoir, apparently, because the people had water rights. That they took their water turns on down towards Preston.
Okay.
Because this Glendale was in a little hilly area. There's always a creek run down there called Worm Creek, and they dammed that up, of course, and 2.5 miles up, and so that flowed into the reservoir, and that's what filled it up, plus runoff. So I lived my first 4 years there, and my dad and my uncle Percy and his family, his wife's name was Eulalia, and I had a cousin, they had a son named Charles, and he was also born in that house there. He was born about 3 months after I was.
So do you have two families living together in that house?
We did. My dad and his family, which at that time, of course, was me and mother. And, as time went on, the twins were born there. And on one side, and Uncle Percy and Aunt Eulalia and their family lived on the other side. And so it was all one great big house. But my dad and Uncle Percy had purchased part of the farm of my grandfather's, and so they farmed together. And after about 4 years, why they working back and forth, and as brothers, they didn't get along all the time. So my dad decided to buy another place. And so at that time, he made negotiations, and they split the farm. So Uncle Percy had part, my dad had part. And that's what we call the Glendale part for my dad. I might mention in passing that Dad and my uncle had an older brother named Christian, if you remember him.
No.
He had part of that big farm, only his was, the reservoir had been built, and his place was clear across the reservoir. And so that's where he lived. And an interesting sidelight there is that for church, they, in the good weather, they rowed across the reservoir in a rowboat to go to church. So that was interesting. Later, maybe later on, they moved away and moved over to a place called Weston, and he was eventually got killed in a beet harvest as he was hauling beets to to a dump, a beet dump. He pulled across a railroad track in front of a train and got hit by the train and killed.
How old was he?
As Uncle Christian, I don't know for sure, I really don't know. He was one of the first ones born in Dad's family. So anyway, the move came and we moved down 2 miles away and bought a farm. And the farm had a barn and had a chicken coop and they had 2 little buildings. And they weren't together. But that's about all it was. And so Dad and Mother had to arrange to put the 2 buildings together. There was a kitchen in the one, and I suppose the people lived there before had used it as a kitchen bedroom, but anyway, they remodeled that and through the years and made it so that it was a pretty nice place. And that was a 40-acre farm, and then Dad bought another it was an 80-acre farm, and Dad bought another 40. I think he ended up 120 acres on that. And so I spent a lot of my early years there on that farm. A mile down the road to the south was the intersection with the road that comes straight out from Preston. And so this was our really first few years was all dirt and gravel, muddy in the farm. That lane was called Jitney Lane, because in the muddy times when they had a hard time getting up and down there, get your jitney up down there. That's what cars were called then. I got my old jitney out here. But there was about 5 families, as I recall, 4 or 5 families on that lane that lived together. And so it was just a mile from the intersection that goes into Preston called East Oneida Street. And that's where the church was built. And it was already built when we moved down there. And there was an old schoolhouse on the corner, it was all built there, and that's where I attended my first 7 years of school. It was a 4-room school. Shall I go into details on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a 4-room school with a big hall down the middle. 2 rooms on one side and 2 rooms on the other side. The first 4 grades was on the one side, and then the next 4 grades was through the wall on the same side. And then the one front room was a playroom for recess for us in the winter time. And then the other room was where our school teacher principal and his family lived. So that was quite a combination. That was a big, big building when I remember going into first grade. And I walked back and forth most of the time to there. One little incident that really bothered me when I was 6 years old in the first grade, and I remember that. My mother took me down and left me there, and my word, that hall was huge. It coats hang here and there, you know, but it's probably 10 feet wide. Looked big to me. But that very first day of school is the first day I ever remembered now of starting school. Some kids in the big room got a hold of me about the end of school and took me way out in the back to the end of the school property and took my pants off. And boy, did I bawl. Those were mean little kids, the big grade. And so starting out, I remember that. But I do have pictures of the first grade in school with the first room. My first grade teacher was a teacher called Miss Barnes, and I remember her. And I got a picture of her in our classroom. So in my picture book, I've got pictures of our first 4 grades, first, second, third, fourth, all out on the front steps of the schoolhouse. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But there wasn't many in the school. As for recess during the winter, we'd go outside and play in the snow. And we'd play games such as mush pot. You ever heard of mush pot?
Haven't heard of that.
We'd draw a line and choose up sides, and on each side at the back, we tromped out a circle. And then what we tried to do was run across the line and circle somebody and get back around on our side. Then they had to go into the mush pot, and they had to stay there. And if we could get that good enough until we got most of them all circled. On the other hand, if we was able to get through and go back to the mush pot and touch their hand and get back on our own side before they touched us, well, then we had our full crew again. We ran and ran and ran.
Like Red Rover came out of that.
And of course we played marbles and had that, and the schoolyard had teeter-totters and swings and things like that too to have for our recesses. Anyway, that's where I spent my first 4 years in a little room, and then the next 3 years in the big room. The reason I only spent 3 years in the big room is because they had 4 in the 8th grade, and I and one girl was to be in the 7th grade. Well, guess what? They moved us up to the 8th grade. So I never did get to 7th grade.
I thought it was the 4th grade.
No,
Well,
it was 7.
It was a big room, and it was.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I was in a graduating class with 3 grades in the big room. And so that made 8 of us in the graduating class. And our school had a model, and it had a name too, and I'll give you the model, but the name was the Preston East Side School. And there was a district number I don't remember. The area out there had a nickname too, and it was called Egypt. And the reason that happened, as my dad tells me later on, that during a drought on a couple of years, why people around didn't have things to eat much, and so the people in the Egypt area grew pretty good crops, so that became the Egypt there, and they could get food to eat, you know.
I was wondering how
But
that was.
anyway, that's what it was. So I came from Egypt. I love my Egypt and I love my East Side School. And so from there graduated and went into Preston High School. Graduated from there in 1946. And of course at those times I got associated with different people and a bigger school, you know, and everything like that. So, how far do you want me to go from there?
Keep going. You got to meet your mother, my wife. My mother, your wife.
Well, I want to know about high school.
Yeah.
Did you play any sports? Were you in any choirs? What were your curricular activities?
In sports, yes. I liked sports. A problem I had was because I had skipped the 7th grade, I was a year behind all the rest of them in high school in maturity and growth and things. I loved playing basketball and things, but I wasn't big enough to get on the team in high school. And in football, I made the second string. And there again, because of skipping the 7th grade, did me in on some of those. But I did do pretty good in track. I started out in the mile because my dad ran the mile, and that was a long ways. And so I went to the half mile. That was still a long ways, so I cut down to what they call a 220-yard dash. And I did well enough in a 220-yard dash to win the district tournament in the district, which included up to Pocatello, McCavan, Downey, all those schools in there, Malad. So I won that. And I won the 220-yard dash in a time of 23.2 seconds. I remember that too. So we went to the state tournament, ran on the medley team, we got second. So that's about the best I did in sports in high school.
How about academics?
Being you bring that up, I graduated with about a C+ average. I wasn't shiny. Attended seminary and graduated from seminary. They had their own building there. Graduated from seminary also, and I have certificates for that. So I never did go on to college. In high school, found a little girl that I kind of liked, and so I got involved in love, and so I didn't go on to college. My dad told me that if you'll go on a mission, I'll support you. But he didn't force me. He didn't say, you're going on a mission. He said, if you want to go on a mission, I'll support you. And so after that, well, I had this infatuation, they call it. And so I didn't go. But this little girl I liked was a year behind me in school. And so I worked at odd jobs a little bit in that year. And we just kept going together. And by the time she graduated, why, we had got pretty well decided we wanted to get married. And so that's what we did. We went to dances in high school. She lived in a little place called Riverdale. And we went to dances in Preston called the Persiana. And that was on a Saturday night dance. And so we didn't date at that time. We just meet each other up, and she'd have her girlfriends and I'd have my boyfriends, and we'd go to the dance and then go home. Anyway, a little bit about that dance hall. In those days, President Roosevelt had formed a unit called the CCC,
Civilian Conservation Corps.
Civic Conservation Corps, and this was during the Depression, and coming out of the Depression, and so they brought troops in, not troops, but people in, and paid them, and they housed them in a camp, and such as that, and fed them, and they had to go out and do things. And what they did was things for the government. Like they'd go up the canyons, and they did in our area. Went up a canyon called Cub River Canyon, and they made picnic tables and set up a restroom, things like this. All things for the government to help us with civic things. And of course, they all showed up Saturday night at the dance too. So that got to be quite a dance. Well, anyway, to continue on, this little girl that I had fell in love with, we decided, well, maybe we should consider getting married. So at that time, after she'd gone through the school and graduated, why,
What was your
that
name?
was in May, graduated. We set a date and got married the next January.
So what year did she graduate?
She graduated in 1947.
And her name is?
Her maiden name was Coy Forsgren.
Okay.
And she came from a farm family of several brothers and sisters. She had an uncle that taught U.S. history in school. I had an uncle that taught biology in school. So that was an interesting type thing too. Anyway, we dated on during the time. She had an uncle going to school back in St. Louis, and so she spent 6 weeks back there with them. And we just went on and got married after on the 7th of January, 1948. And so
Tell
from
us
then
about
on,
some of your friends back then. Who did you pal around with in high school?
during that time, we had two special friends. She had a girlfriend from her ward called Margene, and I couldn't spell you her last name except I could say it, Waterless. What a name. And so, but her name, my girlfriend's name was Coy Forsgren. And so they were real close friends. And I had a close friend from our ward, the name of Don, and I graduated with him and palled around. And his last name was Geisler, Geisler. And also had my cousin Charles to pal around with. So there's, and in high school we got acquainted with another couple of good boyfriends. One was named George Crockett, and the other was named Claire Egbert. One was from Fairview, a place south of Preston, and the other one just lived out of Preston towards Whitney. And of course Whitney is where President Benson came from and was ultimately buried. So that's where he came from. So we palled around together a lot. We'd go together weekly and such as that. Oh boy,
How
well,
did you get into town to go to on the dates? Did you ever go out and pick her up, or did you just say you just met him in town?
pick her up.
Yeah, I seem to remember something about bicycles somewhere. Did you?
Oh, that was that was after we got married.
Oh.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little bit about that. When we got married, we took my dad's car, went on a honeymoon to Salt Lake, stayed at a Hotel Utah, and drove on down to Provo one day. My cousin Charles was going to school at Provo at that time. Said hi to him, drove back, and what can we do? We decided we'd drive out to the airport and take an airplane ride. So that was one of the highlights of our honeymoon, taking an airplane ride in one of these little planes. Anyway, when we got back from our honeymoon,
Oh, wait a second. While you're still on your honeymoon,
pardon?
I've heard a story about the Woolworths across the street, or was it at the lunch counter there that you two decided it was time you tried?
I don't remember. Speak up.
You decided you were old enough to drink coffee, so you did.
Oh, that was that was on our honeymoon.
Yeah, that's what I
We
wanted to
went
know.
down there. Just took a cup of coffee and drank part of it. That was it. So, come back to my parents' teachings and the gospel. Anyway, after we got back from our honeymoon, I had employment with the Ford dealership in Preston. And we, in fact, actually, I started in December. I was with them for a month, and then we got I had employment at this Ford garage, as I was the lubrication technician. In other words, I greased cars. In those days, you had to grease them every 1,000 miles, and to change the oil every 1,000 miles. And if you got 12,000 miles on a tire, you was lucky. Anyway, the first place we lived in was a little apartment upstairs over a plumbing shop. This plumber had the shop downstairs, and then he built 3 apartments upstairs. One at the top of the stairs on one side, one at the top of the stairs on the other side, and then a studio apartment. And that's what we had, was a studio apartment. And you could open the back window, and it'd be the roof of the back part of the garage, of the plumbing shop. And so our first few days, that's where we kept our milk and things, because it was January. That was our cooler. Well, we'd been there about maybe 2 weeks or so, and here come a knock on the door. And so I answered it. Well, gosh, there were some of my good friends from the ward and things, you know, and they says, "We're here to chivalry you." And so they didn't say no for an answer, so they grabbed us and down the stairs we go. And so they had a bicycle built for 2 there. So they put us on that bicycle built for 2 and made us ride down Main Street. And they was following along and having a good time, you know. So we got down about a block and a half down Main Street, and then they started arguing about who's going to ride this back. So my wife and I had to walk back. So they had a special deal, a chivalry. Now that's when they did things kind of crazy with newlyweds. Nowadays they do things a little different. I could tell you a story about an aunt that got married, but anyway, that was our chivalry, and we visited a little bit. Didn't even have any refreshments, and we got through with that bicycle trip, and they said, "Goodbye, we'll see you." So that ended that. It lasted all of 45 minutes. So anyway, went on to employment. While I was there, and I don't remember the month, but the boss, incidentally, the Ford garage was called McCune, M-C, capital C-U-N-E, Motor Company. While I was there, I think it was February or early March, they had made a bid for a school bus for the school district. And so they asked me to go back to Columbus, Ohio and drive that school bus out. Here I was, 19, 20-year-old kid, you know. And so they said, "You can take your wife with you." So we did. So we rode a bus, and we went to Ogden and rode the train and got to Nebraska, and then had to take it, and I believe they had trains then down to Columbus, Ohio. Well, what the situation was, Ford Motor Company built the chassis without the body on it, and they sent it down to Columbus, Ohio to have the school bus body built. It was a 48 passenger, brand name Superior. And so it's interesting, the chassis had been down there so long that some of the rust had settled around the horn button. It's gone through a winter, and it had been there a long time before they built put the body on it. And so, but they got that done. We got all set up, and then we just had to drive it home. We drove Highway 30 on the way home, all the way home, and it was cold. It was late February, early March. Anyway, that was quite a trip to bring that bus home. The heater was just one little heater, ran from heater hoses through the engine, and to try and heat up that whole bus to stay warm, it was pretty chilly. So Coy sat up next to me, and we had a little blanket around. She sat on the front seat, and I drove. But we got it home and had a good trip. I worked there for another 6 months, and then got an offer to move up the street about 3 blocks to the DeSoto Plymouth dealer. And one of the owners at that time was one of our school teachers, and he had a partner by the name of Phil West. The school teacher's name was Bruce Wallace. And so I took that job, and I learned, I ran a service station part, greased the cars, whatever they were, and moved into the parts department and ran the parts department. And so I stayed there, what, 6.5, I don't remember how many years now. Wasn't that long. I'd have to go back and count. But that time, about 3 years, I guess. And so I had a good experience there. It grew, and I moved out of the service station part, just ran the parts department. And then the boss had me do a little book work, and so I did all the repair orders and things and kept track of them every day. So I ended up doing most all the book work except closing of the books at the end of the month, when he had a bookkeeper come in and do all the compiling, such as that. Then I got an offer to go down the street to the Chevrolet dealer, which I did. And so I moved down the street to the parts department. That was a big parts department there. And I moved down there to become the parts manager of the Chevrolet dealership. So I worked there for 2 or 3 years.
What was the name of the dealership?
The name of the dealership was Cranny Chevrolet, C-R-A-N-N-E-Y. He bought that from a company, from brothers called Peterberg. So anyway, I did that, and in the meantime, their service manager had moved to Idaho Falls. And so Coy kept after me, why don't we get out of town? Why don't we move away from our folks and get out on our own? And so we kept talking about that and talking about that. So we drove up to Idaho Falls one weekend, and they were open on Saturday then. So I went to the dealership of where this service manager was, which was a Buick dealership, and talked to him. And he says, oh, I like it up here. He says, we don't have any openings here though at all, so we decided, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. But he says, well, why don't you go over here and talk to this guy that has Oldsmobile. Maybe he has something. So I went over and said to him, no, we're fine. So he said, well, why don't you go downtown? There's a Dodge dealership downtown. Stop in there while you're here. Why waste your trip, you know? So stopped in down there and talked to this the parts manager, and he says, well, we're doing fine here. Don't have any problem at all, but I will write down your name. So he took my name, and we went on home. Decided, well, that was a good trip. Long trip, 4 hours in those days.
And by then, did you have any children?
Pardon?
Did you have children by then?
Yeah, we had Leon. He was born in 1948. And I don't believe we had Clint.
Yeah, you did.
You
Did
should
we have Clint?
by then,
Yeah, okay.
because Clint's 4 years younger. So you should have taken the trip with the two boys.
No, you got left home, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway,
Even when they moved, they brought us.
We,
we went back home,
yeah.
and about a week later, I got a call there at the garage, and the man says, I'm Fisher Ellsworth, and he says, I'm up here to the Burnham Hotel, and I understand you've been to Idaho Falls looking for a parts job. I said, yeah, we did. And he said, well, wonder if I could visit with you. So I said, okay. So in my shop coat and everything, I walk up to the Burnham Hotel, which was a half a block, and visited and met a guy named Fisher Ellsworth. He says, our parts manager has left, and he says, we need a new parts manager. He said, I wonder if you'd be interested. So, of course, that's why we took the trip. So, yeah, we would. So we made an appointment and drove up about 2 weeks after that, or a week after that, on a Sunday. He met us on a Sunday, and so we met him at the garage, and he, of course, took us through, told us what he wanted and what they did and all that things. And so he said, I'll tell you what, he says, even that day, he took us around town even, showing us the housings and things. I remember one thing he said, we have more curb and gutter in Idaho Falls than Pocatello does. So, anyway, learned a little bit about that, and so he made us an offer. He says, I'll give you $275 a month, and he says, we'll move you up here. We'll pay all the moving expenses and everything to move you up here. So we decided, well, sounded like a good deal. So we took it. And so we went home and told Mr. Cranny that we was going to move. And so within the 2 weeks, while we had moved to Idaho Falls, the moving company and everything come, picked us up and things. I'm backing up a little bit. In the meantime, off our little apartment over the plumbing shop, we had purchased a house in Preston. There, and the address is 340 South, 1st West. A nice little home. And so we paid $4,500 for it. So we stayed there a little time. And so I had to sell that house. So, and the Ellsworths, I moved up here, stayed in a home by the tracks, just a rented room for a few days. That Thursday, I came up on Monday, and that Thursday, Dad and Mother came up with my kids, my wife. But the very first day I was there, Mr. Ellsworth, Fisher, says, go ahead and take a couple hours off and look around town. And he says, we got some places to see, maybe you might want to move to, you know. So we did, and or I did alone. And so we finally, they came up on Thursday, visited, went back, and Fisher called me to his office. He said, if you find a place, he says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll loan you the down payment until you sell your house in Preston. And so, looking around, he gave us a real estate man to go with and such, and which we did. And so we found a place up on 13th Street, and that was at 717 13th Street. And it was 10,500. So had family come back up again, and we looked at it and decided that's what we wanted. So through the Ellsworth's assistance of a down payment, we moved up here. The moving company moved up, and here I was, all settled in a home and part of a job, and away we went, you know. So it worked out real good. It wasn't all roses, but the service manager felt he ran everything in the back. So he and I had to cross a little bit or two to get things straightened out, let him know I was running the parts department. But we got that done. They were real good to us. They gave us a 17-inch television set for Christmas the first year after we moved up here. We moved up here in November, and we got a 17-inch Dumont television that they gave us as managers of their business. So I worked for them for till 52, November 52 till 59. In those years, they gave their managers nice things like set of luggage. One year we got a little freezer from them for Christmas. They were real good to us. I stayed with them until, well, I stayed with them all through there, and they built a new building out on what they call the North Yellowstone Highway. And that building is still here. So when they built that building, I had a space inside called the parts department. And the boss says, this is your area, fix it up the way you want, set it up. So I did. And so I became the parts manager there, the very first one of that brand new building. 1955 is when they had their open house.
Now, you have a perchance from remembering numbers from then. You can remember parts numbers.
Oh yeah, yes, I remember, yeah.
Can you name
That's
one?
all we did was by numbers.
Yeah, but can you name one now?
Yeah, do you want to know the, I can remember the, at least one, and that's a pan gasket set for a Dodge 6-cylinder engine. And its number is 933 438. That's a pan gasket set. So, yeah, that's kind of, things hang with you, you know. But they were good, and I stayed with them till 1959. I had not mentioned that agency in those days was a direct factory dealer, which means that the cars came in to Ellsworth Brothers here in Idaho Falls, and Ellsworth Brothers had satellite dealers, associate dealers. They had one in Rigby, they had one in Arco, they had one in Mackay, they had one in St. Anthony, they had one in Wilson, Wyoming, and those dealers had to come into Idaho Falls and get their cars, because the Ellsworth was a direct factory dealer. So all the cars came in here on railroad cars, and they had to prep them and everything, and then the associate dealers would come get them. And in the meantime, as a parts manager, we furnished the parts for those dealers too. So that was quite a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a job. They were so really good to us. That was just a sidelight to that job there. About 1959, I was approached to go into the life insurance business. And they kept egging me on about this and the sales, like they do, the sales manager. And finally, I decided to do it. So I went to work for Mutual of New York. And I stayed with them for about a year and a half, and then went back into the car business, selling cars. The reason that I was a problem staying there is I was called in the church to be a second counselor in a bishopric, and I had to work day and try to get appointments to go out and see him at night, and and then the bishop wanted to meet at night, and I was just gone all the time. So I kind of burned out on that. Went back into the car business, selling cars.
And by that time you had 3 kids.
Yeah, by then the family had grown. Some, yeah. Yeah, you were born in Idaho Falls.
Yeah, but you had Teresa before me. You had
And
Teresa in 56.
Yeah, Teresa, and you were born in Preston, weren't you?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I ended up for the DeSoto Plymouth dealer here in town for a while, and then went back out to the Dodge dealer selling used cars. They had a used car manager that went to the auction and brought in cars and had cars, and so his name is Claude Finley, and so he kind of ran the used car area there, and they wanted to open up a used car deal in Rexburg, and so they asked me if I'd go up and manage it. So for the next 2.5 years or so, we moved up to Rexburg, and I ran that used car deal for them.
And I'm going to interject here. And in between there, between 13th Street, living on 13th Street, you moved over into Ammon when
Yeah,
I was
that's-
born.
That's correct.
Teresa too.
Teresa
Yeah.
was over there in Ammon. Okay.
Yeah, way on back, in our house on 13th Street, we lived there about, we moved in it, we bought a new home in a new addition in Ammon. And we moved into that home in December 1954.
Okay.
So we didn't stay on 13th Street too long, but a nice little home. So we lived in Ammon, and we moved from there when I went up to Rexburg for a time to sell used cars. Well, what happened there was their used car manager was handling all that deal and everything left. He went over to the Buick dealer. Well, I didn't know what to do. He wanted to go over there, and so they wanted to close that Rexburg outlet, so they did. Well, here I was, so I went over to the Taylor Chevrolet garage and sold cars for them for a while. And so I ended up selling for them on College Avenue for a while, and then to go ahead and conclude my employment, I worked for them for about 2.5, 3 years, and I had some run-ins, or not run-ins, but some talks and people that was in the insurance business, adjusting cars, adjusting car wrecks and house fires and things like this. And one of them I was quite well acquainted with, the name of Ivan Larson, no relation. And so I'd talk to him back and forth and back and forth. You know, that looks like a pretty darn good job. They furnish you a car, you go out and you see people. You don't have to search them out. They come to you when you got the problems. Yeah, kind of help them. So we bandied back and forth with a lot of things and questions. And so finally I decided, well, if that opens up, I might be interested. Well, about 6 months later, the manager of the Idaho Falls store left to go to Colorado Springs and manage one there. And so he came and asked me if I'd be interested. So we worked that out. So here we were living in Rexburg selling cars, and I had an opportunity to go to work for them, but I had to move back to Idaho Falls. So at that time, you were all with us, weren't you?
I was born in '60.
And so we was there when Clint broke his back, or his leg, and in school. And you'll remember some of the friends and neighbors in school up there. But so we finally sold that house and moved back down here in Idaho Falls. And I worked for them for, I don't remember just how long.
What was the name of the company?
The name of the company was called the Scott Wetzel Insurance Adjusters. Their home office was in Salt Lake, and they had a satellite office in Idaho Falls, a satellite office in Colorado Springs. And I don't know if they had any others. But that was an interesting job. Had to be a real diplomat. So that ended those things. When I left there, what did I do? Oh, I was dealing in insurance, all right, and it just so happened that the bishop that I was serving under out here came from Preston too, and his name is Farrell Bell, and he was in the insurance business, and he worked for a company called Snake River Mutual. Well, they were mostly a farm business, writing farm buildings and things, and so it came up that they had grown and needed an adjuster in this area. So he asked me if I might be interested in that. And I said, well, yeah, I'd be interested in that. And in the meantime, the Snake River Mutual had merged with a company in Iowa called Allied Mutual. And so I went over to Boise and interviewed, and they gave me the job. So I was the first adjuster in this area with Allied Mutual, a Snake River Mutual affiliate, so to speak. And so I handled all the area in eastern Idaho, and I had the authority to write the checks and things there, and did that. And so I did that for some time. I got to go to Boise to meetings and things. That's where they had the office. Well, one day on the plane coming home from Boise, I sat by the Vice President, Howard Collmore. We visited things, and he says, by the way, he said, would you be interested in making a move over to the sales end? Become an agent for the sales, a special agent, they call them, or sales rep, whatever. And so I said, well, yeah, I would be glad to. So he switched me over to the sales end, and I became a sales rep for eastern Idaho from St. Anthony to Preston and Malad, and I did that for several years. I enjoyed that. I got some good trips out of it from agents selling a lot of insurance and things like that.
I used to go with you on some of those trips.
Yeah, we had some good trips on that. And so we did that real well. Let's see. I don't remember when I left them. Now, well, anyway, through the Allied, why, I worked long enough to become eligible for a little pension, and so I participated in that. Oh, okay. Comes back to me now. I got an opportunity in the sales end, and dealing with the agents here. I had an offer to become a part of an agency, and that was called the Falls Insurance Service, and that was David Hunter and Hal Johnson and Lewis Tremelling.
I thought Farrell Bell was in there too.
You thought what?
I was thinking Farrell was in there too. Farrell Bell was part of the,
No, Farrell was never in there.
oh, okay.
Anyway, so looking at things such as that, why I bought into this agency and left Allied. Then I became an insurance agent, selling to individuals. We had a book of business, so we called it. I don't remember who had left for me to buy this book of business. Anyway, I bought it, paid for it over time, and all the renewals and things, I got credit, and I knew business and things. These were real fine people to work with. I enjoyed them all. We went on some trips too with them, and so I've got some pictures and such as that. But over the years, why things kept going. David Hunter had a heart attack. Hal Johnson went on a mission. We had a lot of those kind of things going on. Lewis Tremelling finally died, and I took over his part. Then I had 20%, and Hal and David had 30% each. But at that time, they had brought in another person from Seattle, the name of Eric Gessel, and he bought another 20%. So that went on, and I finally retired from that agency, and I was getting old enough then that I could. Well, David had a second heart attack, and I thought, boy, I don't know if I want to hang in on that either. There's a lot of pressure there. So I decided it's getting pretty close to 65 to retire. So I left there, and then I had to have something else to do. So for a time, I inspected houses for a company called Rapid Info that inspected houses for insurance companies. And I did around the territory, and they'd give me $20 to go inspect this house and such as that. So I did that. And I did that for a couple of years. I had an opportunity then to, through associations again, the bank business opened up. And for a person 65, a part-time job looked real good. So when I was at Ellsworth, they had a truck manager called Bob Geisler. And when he retired, he went to work for a bank as a messenger. And so I looked into that and was able to get that job. So I did that for 7.5 years. And I was the first junior messenger. And then when I left 7.5 years later, I was a senior messenger.
And which bank was it for?
Pardon?
Which bank?
It started out as the Idaho First National Bank, and then it became, they made the name change because they'd bought banks, called West One Bank, and then it kept moving, and then West One sold out to a bank called the U.S. Bank. And that's what it is today, the U.S. Bank. So I worked for them and really enjoyed that job, but they furnished the cars. There was 7 drivers, and the bank furnished the cars. We worked every other week, and they had to pay us, and they had to pay workers' comp, and they had to pay employers' liability, and maintain the cars. And they put a pencil to the paper and decided, well, what we're going to do is...
Okay, a couple of days later, wait a minute, stop. Okay, now we're back again. We ran out of film last time. So we last left off when you were talking about working for the banks. And the banks had actually put pencil to paper was the old words, figuring out what it cost them, so they decided to contract that out. And that was the end of your employment with the bank, right?
Right.
What happened after that?
Okay, after that time, the bank gave us 120 days at full salary, and then that closed our employment. I believe I mentioned there were 7 of us that was doing this work, and I covered the reason for. Anyway, after that time, I found the part-time job of, being I've been in the insurance business, of inspecting houses for insurance companies. The company that I worked for was called Rapid Info, and that company sent me around the area here to inspect houses for fire insurance and homeowners insurance. And I got paid by so much per house, and the company I worked for is out of Denver, Colorado. Took pictures, measured the house, had to answer questions such as it had a fireplace, or if it had a trampoline in the backyard, or a lot of other things. If the people were home, I interviewed them very briefly and did most of my work from the outside. If they weren't home, I went ahead and started measuring the house from the outside of the tape, and if it so happened that maybe a neighbor was wondering what was going on, why, I had my identification card and everything that made it so I could do that. I went from Afton, Wyoming to Jackson, Wyoming to Island Park, Idaho, and all around the Snake River Valley. I did that for about 2 years. After that, I got an opportunity to drive cars, and I thought that might be a better idea than this one going on. So I applied after contacting someone that was working out there anyway. I got an in on that, so I went out and talked to Avis Rent-A-Car, and I went to their office here in Idaho Falls, and I filled out a paper and applied for that job, which was a on-call job of driving cars for rent companies, Avis and National, around eastern Idaho, Salt Lake, up into Montana, and that got to be a real fine job. I also had applied to Hertz, and I drove a couple of cars into Montana for Hertz. So it worked out as time went on. I got a lot more busy with Avis, and so after about 2 years there, the national manager says, "You're keeping pretty busy there, aren't you?" "Yeah, I sure am." I was wondering how in the heck I'm gonna tell them I just would rather just drive for Avis, but they said, well, if you're so busy, maybe you just go ahead and stay with Avis. And so I did that. And we worked on call, and we drove cars all over the place, from Bozeman to Great Falls to Jackson to Sun Valley to Boise, all up and down the valley here to Salt Lake. And I worked for them for a total of 23 years. That just so happened to be longer than any of the rest of the drivers had served at that time. And so my age and other things come along, so I decided, well, it might be time to retire. And so there's a little bit of competition there that you have to really do with yourself to stay alert. And I was creeping up there to about 88, 89, and well, might be a time just to get out of that business, and so I retired. And so after that, I just have been retired from Avis and taken my retirement. So
So
that does it till present.
is that the longest job you've ever had, or at any one place?
That happened to be the longest I ever worked for anybody in one place. And I really enjoyed it. It was one of the best part-time jobs a person could ask for. We didn't make a lot of money because we were mostly all retired people anyway. And so we just did it on call, and had some great bosses and some fantastic people to associate with to
And you got to
do our
drive along
drives.
your car.
The way it was, Idaho Falls supplied a lot of these outlying areas, and they would get the cars in, even on transports, and prepare the cars. They'd come right from the factory here in Idaho Falls, and so they'd unload the transports right here, and then they'd go through our shop and do the necessary things to get it prepared, and then attach the license plates and the company stickers and things that went with it, and then away we'd go. We had a round-trip driver that usually drove a van, and we'd take as high as 12, 13 cars at one time, either from here to Jackson, for instance, or if the cars were to come back after they are turned in, why then we'd go over there and bring the cars back. And so it was a joyful job.
So, that was the last job you held. You've always had a fascination with cars. Can you remember the cars you've owned?
I could remember some. I could remember the way back ones better than I could the newer ones. But I've probably owned more than 20 cars
What was the first car
in
you
my
owned?
life. Pardon?
What was the first car you owned?
The first car I ever got, lived in Preston, and my dad, talking to my dad, and he agreed with me it's time to get a car. So we went to Logan, and we found a nice little coupe, black coupe, a 34 Ford.
Now explain what a coupe
And-
is, because most people don't know.
It was just a two-door. It had a big trunk on the back. And so
Did it have back seats?
it had just a very tiny back seat.
That was called a coupe.
It was a sport coupe.
Okay, all right.
The thing I liked about it was somebody put on twin pipes, and so it made a nice little roar, you know.
Yeah.
That helped with a lot. But I moved from there.
What year was that coupe again?
As I recall, that was 1934. It was fairly old at that time. And then
How old were you when you got it?
I was out of high school. I was out of high school. And then, of course, getting married, why I needed a car, and I got a 55, maybe 54 Dodge. Before that, though, I'm backtracking here. I got a 39 Chevrolet 4-door, and I got that painted. I didn't mention that in backtracking that I had worked at the DeSoto Plymouth dealer there in Preston, and that's where I was when I got the Chevrolet. So 39, then I got about a 54 Dodge 4-door, and see, where did I go from there? Gosh, I can't remember all the cars that I had. I can remember that in that Dodge I had to put a heater in it because it didn't have one. And then from then on I was working for the Soto Plymouth dealer, so I got about a 52 Plymouth. Had that for a while. Boy, after that I went to the Chevrolet dealership as a parts manager, which I mentioned, and I saw a 46 Chevrolet Fleetline black, fancy car with chrome wheels, so I talked to the boss and wanted that. So I traded and got that one, and I drove that for a while, and then my cohort in the parts department had a Oldsmobile, a real nice Oldsmobile. They had it fancied up with things on the fenders, front fenders, and a hood ornament on the hood. Really nice. And so on through, about that time, I swapped that 48 for a 47 Oldsmobile. Beautiful, nice car. And at that time, we were in the consideration of moving to Idaho Falls, which I covered. And so that's the car we moved to Idaho Falls in. And we drove that for a while. But then they had a Mercury, and I traded that for, oh boy, there's so many different cars I can't remember. I can remember when I was still working for Ellsworth. I got a Ford, a 4-door Ford, and when I came back and worked for an adjusting company, they furnished the car, so I had a car on that. And then when I left them, I got a Buick. I had a Buick 4-door, and I had a Ford Falcon, and I had another Dodge, and on and on and on. I just, lots of different cars.
You remember the first new car you owned?
A new car?
That very first one?
The Buick I mentioned, I got that while I was adjusting cars. They paid for it and such. And so I got that. Then while I was in the car business selling, they furnished a demonstrator for me. And so I had demonstrators to drive back and forth on that. Then when I left them and got into the bank business, I believe I had the Buick, and I'm not real sure on whether it was the Buick or not, but anyway, they furnished a car for me to drive around to the banks. When I left there, I believe that, well, I believe I traded the Buick for another Oldsmobile, and I traded the Oldsmobile for a Buick again, and then I traded the Buick for a Chevrolet that I have now. But I'm sure there's 2 or 3 in between.
Oh, yeah. There was a Ford Fairlane, wasn't there at one time?
A Ford what?
A Ford Fairlane. A white
Just a
one?
short time, yes, he had a Ford Fairlane.
That was one I wrecked. That's why I remember that.
Was it a Fairlane or was it the,
I don't know if it was or not. It was a Ford, had square
yeah,
taillights.
yeah, it was a Ford. You were driving downtown and after a date or something and there was police cars, so you wanted to find out where the accident was, and so you went on down, they had a lane for you to drive and go, and another guy coming the other way didn't follow the rules, and so he hit you.
Yep.
And I was in the insurance business at the time, and at that time the man was insured with Farmers, I remember that. And so I knew the people, so I called up the adjuster and talked to him, and he started to say, well, you got to go get bids and this, and I says, wait a minute, I'm Merlin Larson, do you remember me? And he, oh yeah, okay. He said, oh, just get me one bid and I'll pay you. So it pays to know somebody sometimes.
Yeah, I read it up.
So that's about the bunch of cars that I ever owned.
Okay, let's talk about the houses. Where have you lived?
Okay, in Idaho Falls,
No, let's start further than that.
do you want to go back to Preston?
Yeah, I do. I want to know all the places you've lived.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe we covered it.
Some of them we did.
Okay, we'll recover. In Preston, the first house we owned was at 340 South First West in Preston. And when we moved to Idaho Falls, we bought a house at 717 East 13th Street. And we lived there a couple of years. And then we moved to a little place outside of Idaho Falls called Ammon. And they were building a bunch of houses at that time. And so we made a trade and bought that, traded that house in on one at 2295 Bittern Drive. And that was a brand new house. It paid $11,250 for it. And we had a corner lot, a big lot. And you'll remember that, I'm sure. After that, we lived there, and this is during the time I was in the car business. I had this chance, I mentioned, to move to Rexburg and sell cars for Ellsworth Brothers. And so we moved to Rexburg, and of course they furnished the car then. But while that happened, the flood came to this place here, and it filled up the whole basement and about 2 inches on the main floor. And so we lived in Rexburg at the time, but it was rented out. Well, I drove down in a Jeep that I had from the company, and the last block was about a foot high in water. So I talked to the people who'd moved out that was renting our house, and so they had to move out for a bit. But anyway, some folks around, after the water went down the next day, they come and pulled up the carpet in the living room, took it to Ogden, had it cleaned, brought it back, and it laid right back down again. Well, they pumped all the water out of the basement too. And so the furnace had to be repaired, taken care of, and the water heater. But the folks moved back in for a time, and so that helped out. They moved right back into our house. Well, what happened then, as I recall, we moved back down after I had left after this motor company decided to move their car lot back to Idaho Falls. I moved back down, and and bought a new home on Meadow Street. And that was a split entry home. We traded the one on Bittern Drive on that one, paid $18,500 for it, and lived there for, I don't remember how many years,
While we were
3 or
in
4 or
Rexburg,
5 years.
While we were in Rexburg, did you rent or did you own those homes?
You kids were in school for quite a while there.
2 years or so.
Uh-huh. And so,
We had 2 houses, or is that?
there's, what was that other one?
There's one off the main street, just a little bit of this old stone house. The first one.
Oh, that was in Rexburg.
Yeah.
Yeah, but before we lived there. We rented that stone house for 3 or 4 months, and then we bought a house on 75 East First North, and that was a nice place. And so we had to, when I decided to move back to Idaho Falls, why then we had to sell that. And so that's right. So that ended up, when we finally made a trade on that one, I don't remember what we paid for that now, about $24,000, something like that. And we moved back to this place I mentioned on Meadow Street. I believe was the way that went. And then they moved to another place on Irving Street. And that was 717 East Irving.
Something like
I'm
that.
not sure of the address for sure. Lived there for quite a few years, a lot of years on that. And let's see, where did we move after that?
Here. You moved from there to here.
Okay, yeah. I guess we lived there for 20 years, didn't we?
Something like that.
Quite a while. After that, in my personal life, Coy had passed away, and so I had remarried, and so we traded that house on the one we're in now at 1008 Ashland in Ammon, Idaho. And so this is the place we're living until present.
Okay, you've had a lot of church positions. Church is very important to you in your life, is it?
Yes, during the growing up years and such, I've always been active in the church. The first job that I ever remember, before I left Preston, asked me to help the ward clerk. Well, I was just a teenager, so I just followed him around and did what he told me to. But we moved to Idaho Falls, and I became called to the mutual, and I became involved in the mutual as a mutual president and such as that. We lived in the South Idaho Falls stake at the time, and that was when I lived on 13th Street. Well, after that, we moved out to Ammon, to this Bittern Drive address, and I became as an elder at the time, and so I was called to be the Elders Quorum president. And we had a large group of elders because there's new houses being built all the time and families moving in. A lot of them were elders. We had over 100 in our Elders Quorum. Well, at that time, a year or two later, we was growing so fast that we needed to have a building. In that time, a new building, the church paid 30% and the ward paid 70% for the new building. So we had a building project going on for quite some time. Well, about the time this was getting started, why the bishop had, who happened to be a good friend of mine and used to live in Preston too, called me to be his second counselor in a bishopric. So all during that building going on, why I served as second counselor.
Let's back up a little bit here. While you're the Elders Quorum president, you did a pretty amazing money-raising project.
Yes, before I was called to be in the bishopric, in this project to raise funds for the church. What can we do to raise money? Well, there was one of our Elders Quorum guy had a bright idea. People are moving in, new houses and things. Why don't you build a house and sell it? That sounded like a pretty good idea. The idea was good. Well, we discussed that in our presidency for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we put that up to vote to our quorum, and they says, yeah, we'll help you do that. It just so happened that we had about 5 carpenters in our quorum, and the project manager for the man by the name of Brunt that was building the whole project there, he was his foreman. And so we worked on that, put it together. Our Elders Quorum presidency went in and met with the stake president, and they discussed that with their high council, and then they come back and says, well, if you can handle it and do it, you have our blessings. So what we did, we went to a real estate man by the name of D.V. Groberg and asked him to help on that. And so he arranged for interim financing, to have some financing while the building was built, and that would pay for the lumber and things like that. The man that owned the lot said, yeah, I'll help you there. You take that lot and you won't have to pay me till the house is built and sold. And so we did that. And so for the next 1.5 years, it seemed like that long, maybe it wasn't that long, why we built that house, and that was just a block west of the church we were building. Well, during that time before I was called to be bishop, why they, of course, when they released me, they got a new Elders Quorum president, and he finished up the finishing of the job on the house. It was all enclosed and everything. All they needed to do was perfect tape it and paint it and put some tile in the bathroom, such as that. And our Elders Quorum performed real well on that. Each carpenter agreed to 1 night a week to come over and work. And on that, other volunteers, 4 or 5 of them, agreed to come over 1 night a week and work on the house, which they did. And this foreman for the project manager there, Mr. Brunt, would work with the carpenters and line out the work that had to be done each night, and then he'd come over and check it on the way home, make sure everything was fine, and then he could line out the work to be done for the next night with the next Elders Quorum carpenter. His name was Ross Walters. He wasn't active at the time, and his family was, but he wasn't, and he agreed just wholeheartedly to come over and be the foreman of that. I don't remember all of the carpenters' names. I remember one was Blaine Godfrey, and another one was Olson. Don't remember his name, first name. It's been so many years now, I don't remember all their names. Nelson, McLean Nelson was another one. So I got 3 out of the 5 anyway.
Yeah, so can you remember how much money the others grown?
In those days, of course, you know, money was different than it is now. But after we built and sold it and paid off everything, and paid off Boise Payette Lumber Company, we turned over $3,000 to the building fund.
It's a lot of money.
In those days, it was a pretty good project. Yes, I can tell you what, that's one place that helped me get gray hair. Yep. So, anyway, from there we moved
Well, wait a minute, you're at the bishopric there, so now we're
I was
talking
there.
church.
in the bishopric. How long? 5, 6 years. About 5 years there. We met in a building in the old Ammon town site until our building was built and dedicated.
Okay, what other jobs did you have after that in the church?
Well, from there, there's when we moved to Rexburg for a couple of years. And up there I worked in the mutual area again. And then moved back, and we moved back to Irving Street. And from there I was
You were actually in Meadow.
on Meadow first.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, on Meadow first. And so I worked in the mutual there some, and I became Sunday school president once, and I've served as a high priest group leader there. The time we were there, and then we moved over to Irving Street.
No, back up. You were still on Meadow. Were you ever the High Council when you lived in Meadow?
I don't believe so.
Well, you had a mighty big job while you was in Meadow, and you carried it over to Irving Street.
I don't remember just what it was.
You was a bishop.
Oh, that's one to forget.
That's kind of hard to forget, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I was called to be bishop, and I served there for about 2.5, 3 years, and then we moved. That's correct. And we moved over to Irving Street then. I served as a bishop for, I don't remember, 2.5, 3 years, not a long time, but we moved out of the ward and out of the stake, so I was released at that time. And there. And in Irving, I've served on the high priest group leader. I served as in the high council. This was called the Idaho Falls East Stake at that time. I served on the high council for 4 years, and my assignment there was working with one of the organizations and also in the finance area. While I was there, an interesting thing on the High Council, the stake president for our stake and the stake president for Ryrie stake worked together with their councils, and I'm sure they must have worked with the First Presidency too, or Corps of the 12. Anyway, they bought a 5,000 acre farm up east of the Ryrie Reservoir, bought it together. And that was a dry farm. And so it was when the stakes had farms. And so they made the arrangements for that, and a big wheat farm up there. And my assignment on the High Council was to make the yearly payment to that. And so that's the largest checks I ever wrote in my life, to make payments on that.
Remember what they were?
It's about $53,000 every year. And I don't know just exactly how the church finally took over that. To date, they have it now. But besides that farm, there was a large wooden granary right in the town of Ryrie that was owned, and that went with the farm.
Wow.
So that was part of it, and a big granary. So that became part of the welfare situation. So anyway, after I was released from High Council, what did I do? Boy.
Well, it's basically, after the bishop and high council, there's not much else you can do that you haven't already done.
What?
It's just there's not much else you can do that you haven't already done one time before.
Yeah.
So I know you've been high peace group leader again.
I was called to be high priest group leader there in the 36th ward, I believe it was. I did that for several years, and gosh, I just I guess I'll go from there to where we moved over here. Well, let's see, I better back up there because I served as ward clerk for about 5 years. Served as ward clerk, and so that fills time. And while I was there also, I was called to be executive secretary to the state president in the Idaho Falls East Stake under President Harold McCracken, and I served there for 9 years. So that fills a lot of time. And so when he's released, well, we moved over here, and over here I've been in the clerk business over here too. I became finance clerk for the ward. No, ward clerk. I became ward clerk for the ward, not finance. Ward clerk for the ward. And then when I was released there, why, they asked me to be in a history, ward history, and keep track of all the activities and such as that in the ward history. I did that for several years. And so finally released, and that pretty well does it.
Let's go back to your youth. I'm thinking of some stuff back when you were younger. You herded cows. Go out and herd them all day, take them up to the pasture, and then bring them back at night. Is that right?
That's right. Well, we lived in Glendale, not Glendale, but in Egypt. We still had, after my dad and my uncle had separated and split the farm out, I had, in the summertime, we drove the cows from the one farm to the other, which was about 2 miles. And so for some time I drove the cows up to that farm for the day, and just up the road, the county road, for the day, and then bring them back to be milked, and just spent the day with them. I don't remember, 2 or 3 years we did that. I don't know what I should tell you about. I got a couple of instances that's interesting there.
I think I've got one in mind here, so I know. Tell me more, and I'll see if you got it.
Yeah. Anyway, we always hauled hay in those days, and we cut the hay with a horse-drawn mower, and when it dried a little bit, we bunched it up with a bunch rake, which is a big glide rake with a bunch of tines on it, maybe 3 foot tall, big tines, and we'd go along and pick up the hay and trip it into a windrow, and that was pulled by one horse. And so just right by that rake, It's close enough that I could take my foot and hit the horse in the rump. Anyway, I did that a lot on there. So I'm going to back up a little bit on that. A thing happened back to when I was herding cows. The place that we had bought there had this barn, nice barn, had 2 buildings, and one of them they used as a house and things till my dad and mother put it together to make a house. And they had the chicken coops, I've told you that. Anyway, that barn was a half barn actually. It had a big high part here, just the roof here and down. And then that became the milking parlor, and up on top they had put a ceiling in it, and then put straw and such as that to keep it warm in the winter. And then down to the bottom, why they had the door too, and some places we could feed them in the mangers. Anyway, my next door neighbor had told me one day, you know, there's a there's a skeleton up there in that barn. And he says, come here, I'll show you. So I went up there with him, we climbed up there, and in between the 2x4s, looking down, you can see the straw down there. You look down, it looked like a paper skeleton.
Paper,
So-
not a real one, just paper.
Just a paper skeleton. So well, that was fine. Well, as time went on, I told my twin brothers about that. Well, one day when I was coming home from Glendale with the cows, coming up the hill to the neighbor's place, the neighbor met me. He said, your barn burned down. Oh, no, it didn't burn down. You sure? Yeah, well, I walked just over the little knoll, and there it was, just a bunch of ashes. Well, what had happened was my twin brothers had heard me talking, or else I told them about it, that there's a skeleton up there. And so they climbed up there together. I don't know, they was maybe...
Oh,
Okay, when we moved to away from the house that I was born in, after my dad and my uncle had separated land, decided to farm separately, we moved to about 2 miles away to a farm, and I'm not sure whether it's 40 or 80 acres, maybe 80. Anyway, there was 2 sheds. One had been used as a house, and there was a chicken coop, and there was a barn, and another outbuilding. Well, of course, Dad had to hurry and get busy to make arrangements for living quarters, so they moved the one building next to the other and do some remodeling for a kitchen and those kind of things. And so that's what happened on the move. I spent a lot of time being raised there. Went through grade school and on up through 7th grade before I went into Preston to high school. Anyway, an interesting incident happened as we grew up. My job, one of them was to herd cows in the daytime. We'd milk them, and then it'd be my job to herd them about 2 miles away up to the place that my dad had acquired in his separation from his brother, which we did. And so, as the story goes, we had a next door neighbor named Porter. One of the boys was just about a year older than me, year or 2 years. We palled around a lot, and this barn I was telling you about was actually about a half a barn. just had the one slope of a roof, and the high part was open at the top with some straw for insulation, and then a ceiling, and down below was the mangers and the place for the cattle to come in, the cows to come in and be milked. Well, I was one day with my friend Johnny Porter, and we was messing around up there in the loft, as we called it, and he says, "Look down there." So I looked down there, and he said, "You see that skeleton? Looks like there's a skeleton down there." And so he said, "Yep, there is."
So now it's a paper skeleton, it's not.
And so it turned out, yes. He mentioned that, and so later on I told my brothers about it, and they, of course, wanted to go up and see it. I wasn't home. I was up to Glendale herding cattle. Well, what happened was they went up and looked down there, and yep, there's a skeleton. It's a paper skeleton. Boy, I can hardly see it. So
How old were they?
I would say they were about 5 or 6.
Okay.
Somewhere. They weren't very old. Anyway, they went and got some matches and went out and climbed up there. And so to make it more light so they could see, they lit a match and put it up there. Yep, there sure is there. And the match, let's look at that. And pretty soon the match burned down into their fingers and they let go of it. Well, the match went down into the dry straw. You can guess what happened to the barn. The whole thing went. And I wasn't there when it happened because I was on the way home bringing the cattle in the evening. Somebody told me just before I got to the top of the hill, "Your barn burned down." No, couldn't have done that. But sure enough, I got up there and the barn had burned down. And so that ended that. I am not sure, it might have been my idea to have told the twin brothers there's a skeleton up there. If there was, I'd have to have taken part of the blame. So.
Speaking of giving the blame towards your brothers, the story about the mason jar in the oven.
Oh, if you want to hear that story too, okay. Well, in those days, we always cooked with a wood stove. And in our kitchen, we had a big cooking range, and of course had heavy cast plates on it. And then Dad had a tall water heater right to the side of it. And there was a water jacket inside the firebox, and it would heat the water, so we had hot water. Well, Dad and Mother had gone to town, and the twins and I was just messing around, talking to each other, and so I thought, I wonder what would happen if I took this pint jar and filled it half full of water and put the lid on it and stuck it in there on those coals. We don't know. So they was anxious to find out too. And so I did. I'm the one that went and got it, as I recall, and put about a half a pint of water in that and put a lid on and put it down in the stove, and just stood back wondering what's going to happen. And it wasn't too awful long until boom! My word, that bottle just exploded and blew off those plates, clear off the stove. Soot out of the stove just come out of there. Can you imagine a coal range with what to do with soot and things? Oh, it was a mess. Well, Dad and Mother weren't too pleased. But anyway, we spent the rest of the night, Dad trying to put things together on the stove, and Mother and Dad and I and the twins cleaning the wallpaper off the room. So we survived that, but that was quite an experience.
You told me one time you took off, blamed it on the twins.
Well, If I did, I don't remember. I must have come back to catch my doings.
When you were herding cows, had a lot of time, and I seem to remember you had spent a lot of time trying to figure out names you could call people. And somewhere along, I hear the word yellow-bellied sapsucker. You had a whole list that was about that long.
Oh,
Can you repeat that for me, because I want to know?
I don't know as I can do that. My uncle Percy had a lingo rather than swear, and in taking the Lord's name in vain, he had all these. Why, you lop-eared, tongue-tied, sapsucker, and on and on and on. That's the kind of words he used. So
You had a whole list of them once in a while.
yeah, he on and on and on. I memorized
Okay.
most of them. Would you like to hear about the one time, maybe closing this off, about that I about lost my life?
I'd like to hear that. I'm
About
sure
the
rest of
closest, about the closest I come to lose my life in this existence, at this point anyway. I've talked about the way we cut the hay and bunched it, put it in windrows. We hauled the hay in on a flat rack called a hay rack, is what we did. We used a pitchfork and went out in the field and pitched it up on a rack and pulled by horses, of course, and then brought it in to create a haystack. Well, there was a big wooden thing called a derrick at that time, and you hardly ever see anything around like that. They was made of posts, a big square, and a center post, and then a big long post with a short end down here and a longer end up here, and pulleys were attached to it. Well, you'd run the pulley by a cable back and forth, and that would put the Jackson fork down in the hay and snap it shut, and then tell the horse to go ahead, and it would lift it up to a pulley and then clear up on here, and then back up the horse and let it down until whoever's on the haystack would say, okay, trip it. And so the one on the wagon that had got this together pulled a rope, and it opened up the fork and dropped the hay. So a pretty good sized bunch of hay. Well, my job was riding a derrick horse back and forth. And I wasn't very old at the time, maybe 8 or 9, I don't remember. And so I was a pretty tame old plug horse, workhorse. So they'd tell me when to go ahead and pull the horse up, and then they'd say, okay, back up, you know. Sometimes the horse would turn around and come back, sometimes it'd just back up. But I didn't have a saddle or anything, just bareback, back and forth. Well, this one morning, after Dad had put all the harnesses on them and everything, we got our first load of hay in. And got it all ready to go, so Dad says, go ahead. I don't remember who was on the stack or who was up now, maybe the hired man. So I pulled it up, and he pulled it on up there and tripped it. So I backed up, and he got another one on. And the next one, I told Dad, I says, that horse isn't very good. There's something wrong. No, it's okay. And so after that, I backed up again, and he got another load, and I got the horse going up there, and about halfway up, that horse just went flat on its side. And there I was, riding that horse. Well, I fell down right under that horse, because he just went. Well, as it just so happened, I rolled as soon as I hit the ground, or else I'd have been pancake. And so I rolled off, and the horse didn't do anything. I mean, just laid there, and then Dad, of course, jumped off and come over there, the horse revived some, but it just hadn't ran completely out of breath. Just well, what had happened? Dad had put the wrong size collar on that horse that day
Oh,
and got it out of breath. And so that's what happened on that. And so it just made it right out of breath, and it was about the second or third Jackson Fork full, it just fell right over.
oh, wow.
And so that's about as close as I can say that I ever came to being killed in this life.
Speaking of just about being killed or not being killed, let's go ahead. You've had a pretty healthy life.
Generally speaking, I have, yes, uh-huh.
How many times have you been in the hospital?
I've been in the hospital just once that I can remember. And that
And that wasn't even to be born.
no, you weren't even born. That was when the hospital was over on the river over here.
Yeah.
I never had my tonsils out.
You weren't even born in the hospital.
No, I wasn't born in the hospital, but it was after we moved to Idaho Falls. And what did I go in for? I don't even remember now.
I think she had some polyps removed, is right.
Yeah, it could have been polyps in the digestive system that did it, but anyway, I was there just overnight. That's as long as I've been. I will say that I went on a day operation, not a real heavy operation, to Pocatello one day after a basketball game that I was playing in out here in the Ammon Second Ward. I was under the basket, and one of the players elbowed my nose and bent it over. And so the next morning I had to drive to Pocatello and get it straightened up. They couldn't do it here, I guess. So I drove down there, and a doctor took care of it, deadened it just a little bit, and this is not a heavy bone, it's just gristle, you know. And so he put his spoon handle in there, and straightened it up, went in to sit by for 45 minutes and came home. That's the only time I've been in.
Well, you've had an amazing life. We hope you keep going on it.
Thank you. No broken bones. That's the closest I've had. And so, yes, I've been very fortunate. I've been very blessed, really, to have a good life. And I've been twice blessed. I've had a good life with my first wife, who was a good companion all my life to 56 years. And now I'm twice blessed. I have to be married to my second wife with Peggy, and we've been married 12 and a half years now. And so been very pleased, very happy. The second marriage made it so that I had 4 children, she had 4 children, and they've all got together as a family and really fit in really good together. So really been blessed there.
It has been. Well, thanks. It's been a long time. Let's see if we can't get this out to everybody.
Pardon?
We'll see if we can't get it out to everybody. Thank you.
Well, I'll get it too, I guess.